It's a great honour to be here. As Nigel says, I used to speak on platforms in England quite a lot until I spoke out too much and then never got invited back in about 2009. So it's nice to be here. It's nice to be talking to you. I'm going to be talking very quickly about some of the fundamental ideas that I think should be behind our work and I think should be challenging us to go further in our work. I suppose my talk is probably appropriately the other end of the day to Steve Broach's talk, which was an excellent explanation of how advocacy should be helping people achieve their legal rights. I suppose my perspective is that, however, the law is not always a great guide to justice. The law is judged by whether it is supporting justice or not. And in the United Kingdom today, a lot of our laws, our policy, our government is very unjust. And I was very struck by the excellent picture that was in our conference pack of the history of advocacy, because in a sense it made the point for me. Advocacy was born out of the desire to address issues of fundamental injustice, people in institutions, people being abused, people not being allowed to live lives of meaning. And that gave rise to a great energy and social movement. But when we look at the further down that pathway around advocacy, and of course I'm not suggesting these things are not useful, but what we end up with is a series of regulated, statutorily funded activities that, as Steve mentioned, are very narrowly defined around specific problems. We've gone on a long journey away from that original passion for justice, not that the things that advocates are now being paid to do are not good and important, but are they really the fundamental things we need to be thinking about? And what does all this mean in a time of austerity? Yes, I mean, the image that came to me this morning as I headed off from Sheffield to come here was, is there a danger that individual advocacy becomes running around with an umbrella in the Blitz, trying to save people? The fundamental cuts in social care come from political decisions to target austerity cuts on local government. I also, on the train here, I also looked at the latest statistics from the NHS, NHS Digital, I think, or whatever. They keep renaming the blooming thing. But anyway, the official statistics about the level of people, the number of people supported in the adult social care system. I mean, there has been an extraordinary level of cuts. Between 2009 and today, there's about 700,000 fewer people getting adult social care. Yet it really if it gets mentioned in the news, it's because of the problems it creates in a hospital. Not because of the fundamental injustice that people aren't getting the support that they need to be citizens. And in 2015, just before the election, the government changed the data collection system for data around adult social care. And there was barely any commentary on this fact from leading charities in the sector. Something is going powerfully wrong in adult social care when the system can't even defend itself. When the charities and advocacy bodies feel that they can't speak up because they will get in trouble, because they'll lose funding, or they won't be invited to 10 Downing Street. This is not a good place for our society to be, and we've got to ask ourselves some fundamental questions. One of the questions we have to go back to, which was the question which was being asked in the 1940s, 50s and 60s, is who are we? What kind of society are we trying to create? What is the fundamental purpose of advocacy? Questions of inclusion or exclusion, which is one way of thinking about this, are really questions about how we choose to think about each other, how we choose to think about each other. They're not forced on, it's not forced on us by history to be prejudiced, to view people with disabilities as worthless. We can choose to treat each other with respect. We just so often choose not to. There is, of course, the long history of industrialization and institutionalization. And there's the dreadful eugenic movement. Sir Francis Galton, I came across this on the internet. It's amazing what the internet can provide you. His scale of human beings, in the middle are respectable working class, down at the less social and genetic worth, criminals, paupers, undesirables, and at the top, independent professionals, large employers, etc. Where are you on that scale? Yeah, you're independent professionals, maybe? How do we see ourselves? Who are we? This Virginia Woolf on people with disabilities. On the towpath we met and had to pass a long line of imbeciles. The first was a very tall young man, just queer enough to look twice at, but no more. The second shuffled and looked aside. And then one realised that everyone in that long line was a miserable, ineffective, shuffling, idiotic creature with no forehead or no chin and an imbecile grin or a wild, suspicious stare. It was perfectly horrible. They should certainly be killed. She wrote this just before World War II. This was a common way of thinking amongst the leaders of this country on left and right alike. This is a cartoon by George Gross, German cartoonist. A wounded soldier coming into a bar. These people could, but simply don't want to work. How often are we seeing this same rhetoric played out today? And we see the images of the refugees copying the images Hitler used to stigmatize refugees coming from Eastern Europe. Who invented the phrase benefit thieves? Not the dreaded coalition government, not the awful Ian Duncan Smith. New Labour invented benefit thieves. What a terrible, terrible way to talk about our fellow citizens. What's going on in the presentation we give to each other when this becomes something that the government spends our money on? Scapegoating and stigmatising fellow citizens. You can see why I don't get invited out very much, can't you? I took this quote from Damien Green before he became head of the DWP, just because it struck me as an astonishing statement for somebody to make. He was talking about refugees, but just think about this a minute. High-earning migrants and promising student entrepreneurs will find it easier to work in Britain as the coalition aims to ensure only the right people are coming here, the immigration minister has said. This is from the Scotsman. Damien Green, a Conservative MP, said middle managers, unskilled labourers and benefit seekers would be kept out as the coalition seeks only migrants who add to the quality of life in Britain. Now get past the astonishing assault on foreigners coming to this country and wanting to live here. Just think about what that statement means in terms of all the people who live here who are middle managers, unskilled labourers and benefit seekers, i.e. at this moment unemployed. Yes? He's saying they don't add to the quality of life in Britain. And this is like we just don't even stop to think that this is an extraordinary statement. Theresa May, but if you believe you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere. You don't understand what the very word citizenship means. Nelson Mandela, the time will come when our nation will honour the memory of all sons, the daughters, the mothers, the fathers, the youth and the children who by their thoughts and deeds gave us the right to assert with pride that we are South Africans, that we are Africans and that we are citizens of the world. Who understands better the meaning of citizenship, Theresa May or Nelson Mandela? I don't think that's a very hard choice, is it? What we're doing, and Theresa May used this phrase in her conference speech, the great meritocracy. Meritocracy is another word for an elite ruling over us. It's what the Greeks called an aristocracy or an oligopoly. It's the last thing we need, and yet it has become common parlance in the elite to think that it's a good thing. And meritocracy goes hand in hand with scapegoating people, in picking out groups, targeting them for stigma. This is the world in which advocacy is now existing. Desmond Tutu said, "Be careful what you say. Words do not only describe reality, words create reality." So we've got our leaders at the moment creating a vicious reality for us through thoughtless, stigmatizing rhetoric. We have to reverse this. We have to choose to view each other as equals and to value our diverse gifts. We're all different. We're all different, and it's a good thing. We're human beings, we're individuals, we're different. Get over it. We can choose to welcome each other as equal citizens. We can choose to celebrate the diversity of our communities. And this is not then just a question of a kind of choice that we give ourselves that has no consequences. This is a political and practical question. If we choose to see each other as citizens, then we better treat each other as citizens, and we better build people's capacity to be effective citizens. In my own work, I've tried to identify some of the key components of citizenship, and I'm not going to go through that now. But this is, in a sense, not just a kind of rhetorical project, it's a practical project. If you want to ensure, as the last discussion we had, if you want to ensure that people are free and can live lives of purpose, then you have to put in the practical measures that make that freedom real. But you also have to make sure that people have enough money to live on, that they get decent assistance, that they can have meaningful housing rights, that they can form relationships of love and meaning. For me, one of the key concepts that we should go back to, which in a sense is the concept that is hidden in discussions of mental capacity, is the fundamental virtue of freedom. Citizens are free. And everybody can be free, just some people need a little bit more assistance to be free. Now, this bit I can speed through because you've dealt with this more effectively, because in my writings on this, I had 7 things. So anybody can get from 7 to 5 has beaten me. So I can skip this slide and you can use your left hand instead. But you're welcome to download the PDF if you want to. So this raises some fundamental issues for advocates, I think. I think you have to find a way of repositioning yourselves in the citizenship business, not in the vulnerability business. Because the vulnerability business isn't going to help us change the wider discourse. You've got to start thinking about the independent advocacy as what it is a palliative, it's not a solution. At the best, it can be a bridge to a better solution. You've got to recognize that power, genuine power, comes from community action. It doesn't come from individual action. And when the world is an unfair place, be very careful not to pander to the powerful and not to legitimize injustice. This question of who we are and the society we want to be in comes back to advocates in the form of what advocacy should be. It cannot be the act of a superman or superwoman battling injustice on their own. You have to be thinking about the bridges you build that ensure that the person, the family, the wider community becomes stronger, better able to advocate for their own rights, better able to understand their own rights, less reliant on advocates themselves. Steve talked about not relying on lawyers and therefore being able to use advocates. I'd say advocates should be asking how we don't have to rely on advocates. Some of the most powerful things I've seen are when people who are disadvantaged and oppressed come together and bring about change. And again, for time's sake, you can download this PDF to find some very exciting stories of what people do when they come together to tackle injustice. The medieval theologian Origen said, "The power of choosing between good and evil is within the reach of all." I believe this is true, but I believe that sometimes we organise societies in ways that make it really hard to feel that that is true. I think for many organisations today, for many leaders of charities, advocacy organisations, campaign groups, are really struggling to combat complicity with austerity, complicity with injustice. Lots of organisations who speaking no evil, not standing up for people, charities with huge reserves not doing what they should. And we're at a time when disabled people are the #1 target for cuts. People with the most severe disabilities have been hit by cuts 6 times harder than the average person. So we've got to ask ourselves some systemic questions. You know, we can't be like that Dutch boy with the finger in the dike. We've got to start asking, where does the information and analysis about injustice come together? We might experience a problem fighting a local authority or a CCG or hospital trust in our advocacy role. Where is that information coming together and being powerfully analysed and used? How do we empower individuals, families and communities to take action themselves in our work? And where do we dream, where do we dare to dream about the kind of world we really want to live in? Not just battling these idiocies that are coming from government, but really setting forth a positive vision for the future. There are things worth fighting for. I think if we could achieve something like basic income and reform our social security system, as people are starting to think about, imagine the capacity, the citizenship capacity that would release, the capacity for people to stick up for each other and sort problems out together. Why are we not raising the bar on social care reform? Why do we allow this, the Baroness talked about, this severe means testing? I go to other countries in the world, astonished at the level of means testing in what the supposedly generous UK welfare state. We're not generous to people with disabilities. Means testing is a disability tax. It's a tax on the income of people with disabilities that only applies to them, and we should start calling it as such. The UK is also the most centralised welfare state in the world. It's time to start bringing communities back into the picture and start shifting power back to communities. Not in the corrupt way that this government is currently doing that, where local communities are expected to rely on council tax and business rate, funds that will never be fair or sufficient to fund social care. We can build a welfare state that enables citizenship and community. We do know what many of the elements look like. But we have to believe. So I'm going to finish with this quote, which is one of my favourite quotes from the Jewish Hasidic movement. A rabbi asked his students how they could tell when the dawn had come and morning prayers could be said. One student responded by saying, "When you can see the sheep on the hill." Another suggested that one can tell that the dawn has come when a person is able to distinguish between a fig tree and a grapevine. "No," said the wise one, "it is dawn when you can look into the faces of human beings and you have enough light within you to recognise them as your sisters and brothers." Thank you.